Welcome back to Night School, episode 16, Song of Myself, episode 14, and back with me is my esteemed colleague, Mr. Wesley Schantz. Welcome back, Mr. Schantz.
Thanks. Good to be back, and I got to say, I think you're getting better at those intros.
Well, I appreciate the you saying that because I really did put some conscious effort into attempting to get through that smoothly today. No more bumbling around.
Nice. Nicely done.
Well, you know, as we continue to refine the product here, we have to get a little more polished. And you don't sell somebody a new car without some shine on the outside.
That's right.
All
right. Well, now that we've got them in the door here. All right. So here we're at 37, I think.
Yes.
Okay. 37. You laggards there on guard, look to your arms. In at the conquered doors they crowd. I am possessed. Embody all presences outlawed or suffering. See myself in prison shaped like another man and feel the dull, unintermitted pain. For me, the keepers of convicts shoulder their carbines and keep watch. It is I let out in the morning and barred at night. Not a mutineer walks handcuffed to jail, but I am handcuffed to him and walk by his side. I am less the jolly one there and more the silent one with sweat on my twitching lips. Not a youngster is taken for larceny, but I go up too and am tried and sentenced. Not a cholera patient lies at the last gasp, but I also lie at the last gasp. My face is ash-colored, my sinews gnarl. Away from me people retreat. Askers embody themselves in me, and I am embodied in them. I project my hat, sit shame-faced, and beg.
All right. Well, this is wonderful, and we have a personification of some sort of abstract concept here, something that seems to be able to accompany many differing people in many differing situations. And so one wonders what is the riddle of this thing. And so the first idea I would throw out is that this is a Christian symbol, that we're called laggards on guard, sort of like how Paul calls those Galatians, those foolish Galatians, that we have fallen lazy, or we have fallen, like this is like a stone cast into the glass house. We have fallen short in some way. As human, conquered doors they crowd. I'm possessed. Again, the idea of possession or legion, sort of Christian. We get embody, the word embody, several times. I'm very happy to see that. And so what can be embodied? Well, something like an idea, right? Something that multiple people in acting in a similar way can do. Like people can act in the same spirit, where two or three are gathered in my name. There I am is sort of the idea, sort of a team working towards a next goal, and sort of the idea also of keepers of convicts and being in a prison and dull and intermitted pain, uninterrupted, I suppose, is it seems as if the point here is kind of describing the human soul as like a prisoner in the body or in the world. Sort of a Buddhist Platonic idea, as well as sort of a Christian one in a way, that it is that it finds itself thrown, like the existentialists would say, into a sort of wild and terrible place full of suffering. And but what is the thing within the range of all human experience, even that of, like, say, a mutineer who has betrayed someone, or a youngster whose life is sort of ruined by larceny. And larceny, is that stealing, Wes?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And being tried and sentenced. And so it strikes me that this cholera patient, this youngster, this mutineer, what the thing is that walks next to them is either God, or some abstract concept that is in some way a representation of God, like truth or hope. Askers embody themselves in me, and I am embodied in them. There is some sort of like wine and the drinker of wine connection here. But I don't know, Wes. I feel like I'm circling around something, but I'm not quite there. What do you see here?
I think that the read as a metaphor works, that there's something that is possessing him, and that could be uh, a kind of spirit of some kind. I also find that he is it's an interesting like reversal here, because it sounds almost like he is the spirit which is going and possessing these, or at least accompanying, right, all of these people who are in kind of dire straits.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, which I found really interesting, because it that opening line made me think back. I think it was 28. I was trying to look back. I think in 28 he has that part about how his senses, right, are the sentinels that are sort of like asleep at their duty.
yes.
And so it's something like that being echoed here as well, but it's been modified now, because we just came from these two sections that were about actual war, like they looked like literal battles, right, going on, and so there were guards there too, and so it's this kind of interesting dreaming or stream of consciousness or flow of associations, where you have that image that seems to be used as a metaphor initially for his senses, for allowing in powerful passions and things that he can't quite master, right? Then he sort of masters them in that long 33, 34. He has that kind of cosmic vision. And then we have these sections that are about war, battles, death. And now we sort of meld some elements of each of those into this one. And he is accompanying these people who are not in war situations per se, but who are sort of at the same kind of end point, right? They're basically at their life's end, whether due to some criminal charge or due to an illness. The potential that was in them has in some way been let down, betrayed, right? And he speaks to this sense of betrayal as well. And I think to push the Christian thing, right? Like, what is his accompanying them accomplish? Is it a kind of salvation? Is it a kind of blessing that he's giving them in this last moment by being with them? I don't know to make of that ending, though, that he sits shamefaced and begs. It's like, again, this is a kind of limit of his poetic power that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think also so I think where I was getting the Christian bit from was the idea that Christ was crucified between two thieves, two criminals. So it's like he's like hand in hand with two criminals, and one criminal, according to legend, goes to heaven and one goes to hell. So it's not the crime itself that determines whether one goes to heaven or hell, but sort of the attitude of recognition, whether somebody recognizes and repents and goes through sort of the penance or the negative feeling of having recognized oneself as imperfect. But the idea of sitting shamefaced and begging also, I think, speaks to the Christian inversion idea, or the idea that there could be a God feeling shame. It's just such an absurd or archetypally impossible image, right? Just like a God being a mortal or bound in time and space. A God feeling shame, well, if they're perfect, like what could be better? How's that possible? And then begging, that is something that we do of gods, right? And so begging or feeling shame seem to be the archetypally human things to do. And so it's almost as if that which we all share with each other, which is divine, is our human element, or that which we suffer, or that which makes it so that we should be humble. And of course, what's funny is the word humble, just like the word humility, comes from the same word that we get human from, which is the Latin word humus, which means earth.
Yeah, there's that song, Gaudeamus Igitur. It's like an old, you know that one? It's got a line in it about being humus, right? It's that word there, and I think I see now that he's, yeah, the last person that he embodies and is embodied in, that they embody themselves in him and he is embodied in them. is askers. And I take that to be people, begging for money, and they hold their hat out, right, so that coins can be dropped into it. That makes me think of the way that Odysseus returns home too, right, as a begging man who receives hospitality at his own house. And I think, that's extremely potent illusion that's buried in there. I like that a lot now that I'm looking at it more.
Yeah. It's funny how with so many things, to know something is to love it, right? And it's funny you were saying that about this project, that you're learning a lot about American poetry and literature just doing it. And I'd say I agree and feel the same. And we can see the light at the end of the tunnel after that 33. We'll be done with this in no time flat, it feels like.
Yeah, maybe by Christmas. Who knows?
Yeah. What a present. And then I suppose we can type all this up, or more likely use some listening software to type this all up, and then deliver a book to everybody for Christmas.
There we go. Yeah, distill it down into some kind of bite-size portion, perhaps.
Yeah, we could do we could do our own novella on 33 alone.
Yeah.
All right. Well, shall we on to 38?
All right.
Enough. Somehow I have been stunned. Stand back. Give me a little time beyond my cuffed head slumbers dreamscaping. I discovered myself on the verge of a usual mistake. That I could forget the mockers and insults. That I could forget the trickling tears and the blows of the bludgeons and hammers. That I could look with a separate look on my own crucifixion and bloody crowning. I remember now. I resume the overstayed fraction. The grave of rock multiplies what has been confided to it or to any graves. Corpses rise, gashes heal. Fastenings roll from me. I troop forth, replenished with supreme power, one of an average unending procession. Inland and seacoast we go and pass all boundary lines. Our swift ordinances on their way over the whole earth, the blossoms we wear in our hats, the growth of thousands of years. Elevs, I salute you, come forward. Continue your annotations, continue your questionings.
That's great. I take it that we're the elevs, whatever that word means exactly. I think it's us reading. I'm not sure, but we are saluted, and I want to say hi, Walt Whitman. I salute you too, or speaker. And I will continue my annotations and questionings. Appreciate the invitation, the bidding rather. Yeah. So he starts out with a direct apostrophe, right? Enough. I don't take it that that's really directed at us in the same way that the end of this section is, though. I take it that that's about, what has been going on here, him sort of lowering himself and being embodied, being sort of carried on this incredible vision that's swept over him. He says he's got enough of it now, and he needs a little time, right? He needs to step back from the verge of a usual mistake. Now that's really intriguing, and I think we could speculate on some of the possibilities for what that would be. He helps us out, of course, right? That I could forget the mockers and insults, the trickling tears and blows of the bludgeons, right? So I take that to mean that, again, sort of like you get swept along in some of his beautiful, everything is groovy, cosmic harmony and equanimity in the early part of the poem, or the sort of first couple quarters of the poem. I don't know, second quarter of the poem is where that was, I feel like, was the strongest, although I could be misremembering. But anyway, then he definitely darkens the mood there for a while. And I take it to be kind of a correction against that read of him as being too loose, too permissive, or something like that. That he needs to include the chiaroscuro, right, the dark with the light, and shade in some of those painful and suffering things, those elements of it. And I guess that is consummated most powerfully here in the image of the crucifixion and bloody crowning, right? That's the the point at which he has a kind of spiritual death and spiritual rebirth, or resurrection, or however you want to say. He uses the imagery of the resurrection with the corpse rising in the grave, right? That the rock rolled away, the grave bindings, the fastenings, the grave clothes are falling off him, and just as he has been singing, sort of this, the beauties of nature, the beauties of human society. Now he's incorporated those evils and those hurts, and he's back to blossoms and the whole earth. So he sort of wants to encompass all of this and say, let's start over. Let's kind of start again, right? Let's continue. Let's go on with what we've been up to.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that's an interesting thing to level against, say, a claim that Whitman is a pure romantic. And so one aspect of the poem that we've been constantly illustrating, or that we've been observing throughout the parts, is his claim to a universalism, or a claim to represent all that he has seen in a sort of amoral way, right? The licentious, as well as the horrifying, as well as the wonderful, as well as the transcendent. He'll show it all. And so here again, it seems like he's like, well, and there's cost to me too, as a poet. I partake of chaos and order as much as all things do. And I get mocked and insulted. And I know the feel of a bludgeon. And so, even though I am sort of awe-inspired by the fact of myself being a poet, and I consider it a great calling, it, like any calling, is essentially a self-crucifixion, an accepting of one's binding or of being bound to fate, and one's bloody crowning, one's accepting the cost or the sacrifice of one's time and energy to an endeavor that one will die essentially doing, or one will give one's life either explicitly in terms of like something like the military, or like metaphorically in terms of like giving 50 years of one's time doing something. So he's saying, even if this is sort of a nice job being poet, it's also a terrible job as well, in that you get mocked and insulted and you still die even though you do it. So it's not as if he's missing out on anything, including all the terrible aspects of life that he's been describing for some bit now. Yeah,
I think the mockers and the insults, the blows of bludgeons and hammers, definitely can refer to the critiques that he's getting, and the trouble, the travail that he goes through simply as a poet, as a writer. I think it also has to do with maybe the readership simply not understanding, or even saying that his poem is saying something that he didn't mean it to say, and that he thinks they're not understanding his intention, or deliberately they're misrepresenting him. I heard somewhere that this poem for a long time at the library would be locked up behind the librarian's desk because it was considered too licentious. It's too raunchy. And so back in the day, you had to get like special permission to even get to look at this poem, which, I think he'd be quite amused that anyone at any time can just Google it and find the entire thing in multiple versions, and just like study it at their leisure. Those who've got the device and the internet connection, that is. And so I take it that he in that respect would then say, maybe that the greatest insult is that so few people do bother to read it, and at least that's how I would feel about it if I were him. I guess that given this incredible technology, this incredible access to such a marvelous and effortful work of imagination and striving, that instead I'm just going to go like look at cat pictures or something, whatever stupid thing. But I guess people need that in their life too.
That is incredible. When you look at it in that way, the idea of, the range of entertainments that a human can take in, like we were talking about yesterday in side quests, like with Alypius in Augustine's Confessions, sort of the difference between a vulgar use of time, like going to the Colosseum, and sort of a sophisticated use of time. So Whitman here is, of course, attempting an epic masterpiece. And yet we can spend our time considering that, or we can go look at cat pictures. Both perfectly good uses of time. but the level of sort of mastery or effort put into the presentations of each, and the sort of also level of or amount of information one can derive from one. I mean, you can derive quite a bit of information from a cat picture, of course, but it is interesting that part of the claim of what makes for a good use of time is just how sophisticated the endeavor or the object is you are attempting to appreciate is, and your ability to appreciate it, right? So like, it's not just a sophisticated experience to go to the symphony if you don't understand anything that you're listening to. I mean, it has great potential, but you also need the ear necessary, right? You need to actually understand the music to some extent, or to what extent you do understand the music, you will have a more sophisticated experience. And so it seems as if that's sort of what we're attempting here. An epic poem is a masterpiece, or at least we're trying to determine whether this is in fact an epic and whether it is a masterpiece. And we're trying to bring our minds to bear on it. So we are trying to add something to that which we perceive by extracting something out from it, which I think we both think is there. And that in so doing, we are doing the opposite of being like a troll, a mocker, or an insulter, or a critic. And we're also not being a servile appreciator. We're being teachers, I think. And, well, maybe that's what people are supposed to do with pieces of literature and cultural artifacts, and maybe experiences too. It seems like that's what we're trying to do.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you. I didn't know. Yeah, I think we have time for 30. This is sort of 39. I mean, you know how we are with the short ones. We usually have more to say, but let's give it a try, because only 13 more weeks after this, or 13 more parts.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to 39. The friendly and flowing savage, who is he? Is he waiting for civilization, or past it and mastering it? Is he some Southwesterner raised outdoors? Is he Canadian? Is he from the Mississippi country, Iowa, Oregon, California, the mountains, prairie life, bush life, or sailor from the sea? Wherever he goes, men and women accept and desire him. They desire he should like them, touch them, speak to them, stay with them. Behavior lawless as snowflakes, words simple as grass, uncombed head, laughter, and naivete, slow-stepping feet, common features, common modes and emanations. They descend in new forms from the tips of his fingers. They are wafted with the odor of his body or breath. They fly out of the glance of his eyes.
All right, interesting. So this notion of the friendly and flowing savage, who is he? Is he waiting for civilization, or past it and mastering it? At first, one has the actual image of what Whitman would have considered savage. So at the time, he would have probably either thought of a Native American, or someone who had been enslaved in America in some way or another. Or, he did live during the time of slavery in America, although he finishes this in 1892. But that said, he also seems to suggest that this savage could be something like a common spirit shared between people. Wherever he goes, men and women accept and desire him, something that can be shared. They desire he should like them, touch them, speak to them, stay with them, sort of like as if he is like a spirit of Zeus or Hermes, the spirit of the stranger, or of that which is different. And when it is invited in to civilization, sort of this element of chaos or threat, but also hope and renewal that it's hard to say that it's necessarily positive, but that different things happen. Behavior lawless as snowflakes. words simple as grass, like in that grass imagery. And that seems to be true, right? Because grass is there, it's real. Uncombed head, again, that's sort of like a real, a natural, a primitive, a savage sort of thing when your hair is not combed up. Laughter and naivete, again, natural sort of aspects of human existence. And that which is common between us, that which is not simply cultural, seems to be his idea. Stepping feet, common features like physical features, common modes and emanations, things that we do, things that we produce. They descend in new forms from the tips of his fingers. That seems also to be a commentary on what he is doing here, right? This is a new form of a poem, but a poem and poet have been roles and sources of information or actions that have thousands of years of history. They're wafted with the odor of his breath or body or breath. That's sort of also a Christian communion / spirit image, the air, that which can be shared between people. And of course, the idea of communion is the idea of eating the body of the Lord. The body of the Lord is, of course, information and that which can be shared between people. And so it is an abstract notion that when people share a common goal together, that is what ties them together in the strongest possible way and creates the most amount of trust between them. And that is the idea behind a religion and a political system, rather than simply being bound by blood or something physical. And they fly out of the glance of his eyes. I guess I'm not exactly sure what to do with that very last, that bit, but that also seems sort of like one of those primeval and real experiences. Seeing the look in someone's eyes and how that indicates how they feel or think about something.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you're saying about the way that we we bring something to what we go and read or go and listen to, and that's sort of conveyed by the idea that this these new forms, this new behavior, this new energy that flows out comes with the glance of his eyes, right? So he transforms not only what comes from his fingertips that he sort of makes, but also makes new the things that he looks upon, or sort of like experiences that he provides for others, as well as experiences that he has from outside of him, are all sort of getting a rebirth here. Is how I take the uncombed head made me think of and that it's in that same line with naivete. It's pretty close to an image of Eve. It's like an Adam and Eve kind of deal. You just had the simple as grass, and this is lawless, right? This is before there's a law, so there's some kind of innocence that is here to be encountered, that he introduces after. Again, I think it's significant. This comes well into the poem, right after he's gone through a long process. Now we have this kind of Edenic image return, and it's got a very different flavor now. He leads us into it. I guess he sort of suggests some questions that we should be asking, right? And like the who is he question is accompanied by a much more loaded question, right? Is he already past and master of civilization, right? So it's like sort of like you can think that you are, civilized and that you're in some way superior, but really you need to be asking yourself, what is it for? Like, what is the thing which your civilization is really leading towards? Isn't it simply this? Isn't it simply this kind of new outlook of fresh desire, right? Fresh words and simple words, and a novel and I don't know exactly, unfallen, it sounds like, experience of the world. It's a very high challenge, a very tough question to answer, but he sort of loads them on. He asks one question, and then he asks sort of a two-part question, and then he starts piling in multiple questions within the same line until you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess, there in the fifth line of and then he starts to try to try to describe his idea of the answer, at least.
And just
I
on
think
that idea of it being Edenic, and it seems as if what's lodged in there is sort of a cyclical perception of history then, sort of as, just like Dante suggests in his Purgatorio, as you move forward in time, you actually move backwards in time, like the Purgatorio, because you use your time in order to get to the first place ever, Eden, earthly paradise. And it's also the same way in Greek mythology. The Age of Gold, which was created by Saturn or Kronos, well, after Kronos is defeated and goes down to Tartarus, eventually he is restored to being the king of the White Isle, which is where the men from the Age of Gold are then placed. And so he returns to prominence over a people that required no laws because they had no weapons and who just became rich amongst each other and were sort of immortal. And so the idea of the coming of the golden age over and over again, and whether that's before or after a certain time depends on, whether someone sees time as linear or circular. And also that it seems as if what makes for a golden age is that what makes for the law of man is his own judgment / behavior, not any sort of law itself. And that's sort of also the promise of the West. And that's the sort of the promise of America as well, that it is a place created by the laws of people's actions rather than simply being dictated how they should act by laws. That our laws allow us the freedom to act in the ways that we think are best, rather than constricting us to a certain way of being.
Yeah, I think that idea of the West is really significant in the context of Whitman's time when he's writing, right? These new states being admitted to the Union, that's a large contributing factor to the outbreak of the Civil War, and that kind of reunification of the country that follows from it, that as Lincoln talks about, like trying to bind up the wounds. Again, he's using very explicit Christian imagery in that second inaugural address. And I think he also makes me think of Huck Finn here. And I don't know whether Whitman read Twain, admired Twain or not, but that idea of, civilization, and Huck always spells it with an S. And, so don't civilize me. And I think there's a very strong component of that. And I think it's very alive and well, because kids today in school, you'll hear them call each other savage.
Yes.
Something that they know they ought not do, but they want to do it anyway. And they're sort of joking about it sometimes, but they're sort of also like, well, aware that they're sort of wild, and they need to be tamed, but they're going to fight it every step of the way. They're savage. It's funny. I like that.
Well, speaking of savage, it looks like we are through now. Whereas we were just through 1/4 of the poem, we are now through 3/4, and we now enter the winter of our discontent, as it were, the winter of this endeavor, the Vivaldi winter. Maybe we can play some Vivaldi winter before the next part, or maybe the listeners can go and just listen to it.
Yeah. I think that would work just as well. You guys have that access, obviously, if you're listening to us. So use it wisely out there, all you 11s. Until next time, guys.
Yeah, until next time. Thank you, Mr. Wesley Schantz, again, for your time.
Thanks, Alex.
All right. Have a good one. You too.